My name is Gerald Mason. I'm 79 years old, a retired history teacher, and I live alone in a modest single-story house in Topeka, Kansas. It's the kind of house that seems to sigh with the weight of the years, its windows groaning softly when the wind rolls through the trees out front, its porch creaking under my step like an old friend who still remembers how I used to come home with bags of groceries and a kiss ready for my wife. These days, it's just me and the silence. There's no one to meet me at the door, no voice calling from the kitchen, no clatter of dishes or the smell of fresh cornbread. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 12 years ago, and with her went the last constant warmth in this home. Since then, the days have been quiet, and the nights are long, not in hours, but in the way they settle into your chest and sit heavy. I wake early, out of habit more than need. I still set the coffee to brew every morning, just like Eleanor used to, even though it doesn't taste the same. She had this way of adding a pinch of cinnamon and just the right amount of cream, something I never quite got right, even after all these years. I read the newspaper with trembling fingers, struggling to make sense of a world that seems increasingly disinterested in men like me. There's a stack of library books I tell myself I'll finish, though I rarely do. I try to keep my mind active because I've seen what happens when the mind goes still. I tend the roses in the backyard, those stubborn things that still bloom as if Eleanor were whispering encouragement to them from beyond. She loved those roses. They're resilient, she used to say. Like you, Jerry. But I don't feel resilient. Not anymore. My daughter, Christine, lives just 20 minutes away. She's a lawyer, successful, respected, always dressed sharply, always busy. We don't see each other much. Once, maybe twice a year. Thanksgiving if I'm lucky. Christmas sometimes if the weather permits. Phone calls have become fewer. I used to call her every Sunday morning. Eventually, those calls felt more like intrusions than conversations. She'd answer distractedly, tell me she had just stepped into a meeting or had errands to run. I stopped calling, and she didn't notice. That was maybe 5 years ago. When Eleanor died, Christine took care of the legal arrangements with startling efficiency. I remember sitting on the worn green couch in our living room, staring at the floor while Christine flipped through papers, asking for signatures. She never cried. Not once. She told me to rest, to take time for myself. Let me handle this, Dad. You don't need to worry about anything right now. I wanted to believe she was being kind, but the kindness felt practiced, like something she had learned in law school rather than from life. That was the beginning of a shift between us, one that I couldn't define at first, but which has only grown wider with time. There's a photograph that sits on the mantel in the living room. It's the three of us, me, Eleanor, and a young Christine, maybe 6 or 7 years old, at a picnic by Lake Perry. Eleanor's holding a sandwich, Christine's arms wrapped around my neck, and I'm smiling like I never had a care in the world. I stare at that photo sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, and wonder where that moment went. Not the picnic. I remember the day clearly, the ants, the spilled lemonade, the way Eleanor laughed when Christine got mustard on her chin. I mean the feeling of that moment, the sense that we were bound together in a kind of unspoken, permanent closeness. That was before life and ambition and disappointment had their say. I remember the first time Christine called me Dad with a certain coolness in her voice. It was after Eleanor's funeral. I just asked her, gently, whether she thought she might visit more now that it was just me. She looked up from her phone, sighed and said, "Dad, you'll be fine. You're independent." There was no malice in her tone, just a finality I hadn't expected. I nodded, said nothing. She had always been a focused girl, driven even as a child. I remember when she got her first B on a report card. She cried in her room for hours. I held her and told her it didn't matter, but she wouldn't listen. She was already chasing perfection. Now she chases something else. Success, maybe. Status. Control. I don't know anymore. What I do know is that somewhere along the way, I went from being her father to being an obligation. A name in her contacts list. A birthday to remember. A source of occasional worry. She calls now only when something needs to be signed, when some form arrives at her office related to my pension or insurance. Always quick, efficient conversations. Just need your signature, Dad. Have you updated your beneficiaries? Don't forget to take your meds. A list of instructions disguised as concern. I suppose I'm not the easiest man to deal with. I ask too many questions. I get confused about passwords. I forget to update my phone. But I still remember every detail of the day she was born. The way Eleanor squeezed my hand and said, "You better not faint, Gerald." And how I didn't, how I stood there, holding this tiny, furious thing with lungs like an air horn and the eyes like mine. That was the happiest day of my life. I remember thinking, this is what forever feels like. But forever, I've learned, has a different meaning to everyone. Lately, I've been thinking more and more about what happens after I'm gone. I've got some money set aside, not a fortune, but enough. The house is paid off. I've written out my wishes on a yellow notepad that I keep in the desk drawer, next to the bills and stamps. I've been meaning to get it formalized, put together a will, appoint someone to handle my affairs, maybe write a letter or two. I thought Christine would be the obvious choice. She's capable, she understands the law, and she's my daughter. But something stops me every time I reach for the phone. Something in me hesitates. I can't shake the feeling that she wouldn't handle things the way Eleanor would have wanted, or the way I need. Sometimes when I think too long about it, I feel this quiet shame rise up in me. Not because of anything I've done, but because of everything I didn't do. Maybe I didn't hug her enough. Maybe I worked too late, or was too strict when she was a teenager. Maybe I didn't protect her from her own ambition. I don't know. It's hard to say when the distance began or whose fault it was. Probably both of ours. But what hurts the most is realizing that the distance has become normal, expected, permanent. And still, I hope. I hope that someday Christine will sit with me, not because she has paperwork or questions about my estate, but because she wants to know who I am, who I was, what I loved, what I regret. I hope she'll ask about Eleanor's laugh or the way her perfume lingered on my shirts, even after she passed. I hope she'll remember the man who taught her how to ride a bike, who stayed up late helping her with science projects, who cried silently in the hallway the day she left for college. I hope she sees more than the old man I've become. But hope is a fragile thing at my age. It flickers in the wind of reality, and most days it dims. That's why I've started putting things in order, slowly and quietly. Not because I expect anything to change, but because I want to leave behind a truth no one can deny. My memories, my wishes, my final words, written in ink, witnessed, signed, and sealed. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but for dignity. Because if the last thing I leave behind is clarity, then perhaps I will have mattered in a way that words alone could never capture. And perhaps, when Christine reads what I have written, when she sees the name of the woman I trusted more than my own blood, when she learns that I did not forget everything, even as I forgot birthdays and names and passwords, perhaps then she will understand something deeper than law or legacy. Perhaps then, and only then, she will remember what it means to be a daughter. Christine called me on a Tuesday. It was early afternoon, and I was out in the yard pruning the last of the summer roses. The air had the heaviness of early September, the kind that presses on your chest and reminds you that another year is winding down. My knees ached, as they always do when I squat too long, but the call distracted me from the pain. Her name lit up the screen of my old flip phone, and for a moment I just stared at it, surprised. She hadn't called in over 2 months. The last time was on my birthday. She left a voicemail. I picked up, brushing soil off my hands onto my pants. "Dad," she said, her voice clipped and breathless, like she was walking fast or multitasking. "I'm thinking we should do dinner this weekend. Just you and me. Maybe Sunday?" I was so caught off guard that I didn't know what to say for a moment. It had been years since we'd had dinner. Just the two of us. "Sure," I said finally. "Sunday sounds fine." We met at a place she chose, one of those new open kitchen restaurants with concrete floors and menus that change weekly. She ordered for both of us without asking. Pan-seared trout and kale salad, no appetizers, no dessert. "You need to be careful about sugar and salt, Dad," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The waitress poured sparkling water into our glasses, and I resisted the urge to ask for a beer. She talked for the first half hour about work, her new client, some messy estate case, the usual. I nodded, pretending to follow. Then, somewhere between bites of trout and a sip of lemon water, I mentioned casually that I had finally gotten around to organizing my documents. "You mean bills?" she asked. "Bills, bank statements, my pension info, and—" I paused, watching her reaction. "And I've decided to draft a will." Her fork froze in midair, then clinked softly against the plate. "A will," she said, too quickly, then laughed. "Dad, you don't need a will. Everything's going to me, right?" She said it with a laugh, but there was something brittle under the surface, something defensive. I smiled politely. "Well, that's what I thought. But I figure it's better to be clear. No confusion later." Her posture changed then, just slightly. She leaned forward, placed her utensils down carefully, and folded her hands. "Dad, I'm your only child. There's no one else. Legally, it'll all come to me anyway. Wills just complicate things. Probate, taxes, unnecessary paperwork. Besides, I already help manage your accounts." That last line hit me harder than it should have. I had almost forgotten about the paperwork I'd signed last year, giving her access to my checking account. It was meant to make bill paying easier, she'd said. "But I'd feel better putting everything down officially," I repeated gently. "So people don't argue later." She looked down at her napkin and twisted it slowly, then looked back up with a tight smile. "Who's going to argue, Dad? You don't have any secret heirs, do you?" I wanted to tell her then that I wasn't worried about outside heirs. I was worried about being erased. I was worried that after I was gone, all the pieces of me, the house, the books, the letters, the roses, would be swept away without a second thought, parceled out or discarded like junk at a garage sale. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, "It's not about who gets what. It's about saying what matters." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she picked up her fork and resumed eating, but slower this time. The conversation shifted back to neutral ground: work, weather, my cholesterol. But something had shifted, and I could feel it like a draft coming under the door. When the check came, she paid it before I could reach for my wallet. "My treat," she said, her tone light again. "You've earned it." As we walked to the parking lot, she reached out and touched my arm. "Seriously, Dad, let's not overcomplicate things. I'll handle everything when the time comes. You don't need to stress about paperwork at your age." That night I sat in my living room and replayed the dinner over and over. It wasn't that she had objected to the will. Anyone might find it a little morbid. But it was the way she had said it. "I'll handle everything." As if I were already gone. As if my choices no longer mattered. I remembered the documents she had asked me to sign after Eleanor passed, when I was too dazed to read the fine print. I remembered the forms from the bank that I assumed were just for online access. Now, a new unease began to bloom in me, quiet but steady. Had I given her more power than I realized? Did she already control more than I knew? The next morning, I went to my desk and pulled out the accordion folder where I kept my papers. Pension records, mortgage documents, insurance policies, all there. I flipped through them slowly, then pulled out the most recent bank statement. I noticed a few withdrawals I didn't recognize. Nothing huge, but unusual. Transfers to an account I didn't recall setting up. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone. I called the bank, explained who I was, asked to verify my account activity. The woman on the line was polite, but hesitant. "Mr. Mason," she said, "we have your daughter listed as an authorized user with full access. She initiated those transfers. Would you like to schedule a meeting with a manager to review your access settings?" I said yes. I said it too quickly. I sat there after hanging up, staring at the wall. It wasn't the money. It was the presumption. The quiet, seamless way Christine had taken over. No warning, no discussion, just quiet assumption that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't mind, that I wouldn't care. That evening I took out my old journal. It was leather-bound, a retirement gift from one of my students and mostly empty. I opened it to a fresh page and began to write. Not about money, not about wills or bank accounts, but about what I wanted remembered, not by the courts or lawyers or Christine, but by the world or whoever might come across it when I'm gone. I wrote about Eleanor's laugh, about the way she used to hum while doing the dishes, about the poem she wrote me on our 10th anniversary. I wrote about the day Christine was born, about how scared I was holding something so small and precious. I wrote about the apple tree in the backyard, the one Eleanor planted the day we bought the house. I wrote until my hand ached. I wrote because I suddenly realized something. Christine didn't want a will because she didn't want anything written down that she hadn't already decided. She didn't want a record that could contradict her version of who I was, or how she had taken care of me, or how things were meant to go. But I needed that record. Even if it changed nothing, even if no one ever read it, I needed it for me. To know that my life had shape, that I hadn't just drifted into old age and vanished without leaving a word. The next day, I made an appointment with a local attorney. His office was downtown, near the courthouse, in a red brick building that smelled of paper and time. He was younger than I expected, early 40s maybe. But he listened patiently as I explained what I wanted. "Simple will," I said. "Clear language, no loopholes." He nodded, took notes, asked the right questions. "Do you have any specific beneficiaries?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, then said yes. "I want to leave something to a friend," I said. "Someone who's been there." I gave him Lorraine's name, my neighbor. A woman who checked on me more in the last year than Christine had in 5, who brought soup when I had the flu, who called on Christmas, who listened. I left the lawyer's office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. A small, defiant flicker of control. I was still here. I could still decide, and no one, not even my daughter, could erase that from the record. A few weeks passed after my visit to the attorney, and though I hadn't told Christine about the will, I felt its presence like a quiet stone in my pocket, something solid I could touch when doubt crept in. But the strange thing about clarity is that it tends to bring with it a new kind of tension. It doesn't ease the pressure so much as shift it. I found myself watching Christine more closely during our increasingly rare conversations, reading her tone for signs of suspicion, listening for the subtle recalibrations in her speech whenever money, or the house, or the future came up. And it did come up, more often than before. She started dropping by unannounced, a habit she'd never indulged in for as long as I could remember. She would arrive around lunchtime, holding a coffee she never finished, dressed in her crisp slacks and silk blouses, glancing around the house as if mentally inventorying its contents. One Friday afternoon, she appeared with a stack of folders. "I thought I'd help you reorganize your records," she said breezily, already making her way to my office before I could answer. I followed, uneasy. She pulled out my file drawer with the same ease you might open your own kitchen cabinet. "There's a better way to streamline this stuff, Dad. You're old school. Physical files are risky. What if the house caught fire? Do you have digital backups?" I stood behind her, my hands clenched. "Some things I don't want in the cloud," I said. She looked over her shoulder with a grin. "You sound like one of those conspiracy theorists. Come on, you trust me, don't you?" The question hung there, half rhetorical, half dagger. I didn't answer, and she didn't press. She just went on sorting, pulling, labeling, moving items from one folder to another. I watched as she took the folder labeled legal and slid it into her briefcase. "Just for safekeeping," she said. "I'll make a scan and bring it back next week." I didn't protest. I should have. But in that moment, I felt something worse than anger. I felt old, tired, like I was in the way of my own life. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that folder. What if she saw the will? I'd tucked it behind other papers, but she had taken the entire file. My chest tightened every time the phone rang. I rehearsed explanations, denials, revisions. But no call came. When she finally did return the folder, 10 days later, it was without comment. "Everything's organized now," she said, placing the file drawer back with exaggerated care. "You can sleep easy." But I didn't. That night I opened the drawer and pulled out the folder. The will was there, but the pages were out of order, slightly smudged. A corner folded that hadn't been before. I couldn't be certain, but I had the distinct stomach-turning sense that she had read it. And not only read it, but studied it. The following Sunday, she invited me to her house for dinner. The first such invitation in more than 2 years. "The kids are home from college," she said, "just for the weekend. They'd love to see you." I hesitated. The last time I'd been to her home, I'd been made to feel like a guest who had overstayed his welcome by the time dessert was served. But something in her voice, eager, high-pitched, too bright, made me suspicious. I agreed to come. Their house was large, sleek, filled with gray furniture and minimalist art. Everything in it seemed allergic to comfort. The twins, Hazel and Evan, were polite but distant. They asked about my garden, then quickly returned to their phones. I didn't blame them. We were strangers. It wasn't their fault. Over dinner, grilled salmon and roasted squash, Christine was unusually attentive. She poured my water before I asked, laughed too loudly at my mildest jokes, touched my hand when she passed the bread. Thornton, her husband, was more reserved, his gaze flicking toward me with a mix of calculation and boredom. After dessert, Christine leaned in. "Dad, we've been thinking," she began, glancing at Thornton. "Maybe it's time to talk about long-term plans." I set my fork down slowly. "What kind of plans?" "For you," she said. "The house, your finances, your care eventually. You're still independent now, but that won't last forever. And if something happens suddenly, well, we just want to be prepared." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Thornton cleared his throat. "There are some great assisted living facilities near us. Top-rated. You wouldn't have to deal with upkeep or stairs or grocery shopping. Everything's taken care of. You'd be safe." I looked at Christine. "You want me to sell my house?" "Not now," she said quickly. "Just eventually. While you can still make those decisions. It would be smart, sensible. We could help you transition." I pushed back from the table. And where do you come into that equation? Do I sell the house and just hand you the check? Of course not, she said too fast. We'd help you manage it. Make sure it's used wisely, for your comfort. I laughed then, a dry, humorless sound. My comfort, I repeated. That's what this is about. She flinched. Don't twist this, Dad. We're just trying to help. No, I said, standing slowly. You're trying to consolidate control. You want to manage everything, my home, my money, my memory. But I'm not gone yet. The room fell silent. Thornton shifted uncomfortably. Christine looked stricken for a moment, then composed herself. Maybe we should talk about this another time, she said. I didn't reply. I left. The next morning, I changed the locks on my house. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was a necessary one. I realized that the moment Christine took that folder without asking, she had crossed a line, and the invitation to dinner was not reconciliation, it was strategy. Positioning. She saw the will. I was sure of it now, and it had not gone the way she'd expected. There had been no mention of her receiving everything. There had been other names. Lorraine's among them, and that, more than anything, had changed the game. Days later, I received a letter in the mail from a financial firm I'd never dealt with. Inside was a notification that a power of attorney form had been submitted under my name. My heart nearly stopped. I called immediately. And after multiple transfers and verifications, a weary-sounding man finally told me the form had been received electronically, signed digitally by a Gerald Mason email address I didn't recognize. Christine had created it. I spent the rest of the day at my lawyer's office. We filed to revoke all prior powers of attorney. We secured my accounts with new passwords, closed the joint access Christine had quietly opened, and established a legal notification block. Any action attempted on my behalf without physical, notarized signature would be rejected. I walked out of that office, feeling both violated and vindicated. It was happening. Slowly, insidiously, the erosion of my independence was underway, and I was expected to smile and comply. To be grateful. That night, Lorraine brought over chicken soup. I hadn't told her everything, but she could see something had shifted. We ate in silence, and then she sat with me in the living room, her hand on mine. You don't owe anyone your silence, Gerald, she said softly. Not even your daughter. And I knew then that silence would no longer protect me. It would bury me. I was going to speak, through my will, through my actions. Through every legal paper they'd have to read through tears when I was gone. Because I was still here, and I would not be erased. It happened on a Tuesday, just after noon, when I returned from the grocery store to find Christine sitting on my front steps. She hadn't called. She hadn't knocked. She just waited there, her expensive coat folded over her knees, a paper cup of coffee cooling beside her, and a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I was in the neighborhood, she said by way of explanation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 weeks, not since the dinner that ended with me walking out and changing the locks. I didn't invite her inside. I set the grocery bag on the porch bench, pulled out my keys, and looked her in the eye. Why are you really here, Christine? She sighed and stood slowly, brushing invisible lint off her slacks. You're angry, she said. I get it, but we need to talk, really talk. I didn't answer, but I unlocked the door and stepped inside, leaving it open. She followed. The house felt colder with her in it, as if her presence disrupted something fundamental in the air. She looked around, taking in the living room, the framed photos, the neat stacks of books and magazines. You've done some rearranging, she said lightly. I didn't bother to respond. Dad, she continued, we need to stop this nonsense, this paranoia. You think I'm trying to take something from you, that I'm plotting, but that's not what's happening. I turned to face her. You forged a power of attorney document in my name. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I didn't forge anything. I submitted a digital form because you've been... She paused, confused lately, forgetting things, misplacing items. I was trying to protect you. Protect me, I repeated, my voice low. You're protecting yourself from the fact that I've made decisions you don't like, from the idea that you might not be in charge when the time comes. Her eyes flared, then narrowed. So it's true, then. You changed your will. I said nothing. I didn't need to. You've given part of it to that woman next door. The word "that" dropped like poison from her mouth. Lorraine has done more for me in the last year than you have in the last 10, I said. Christine's hands clenched. She's manipulating you. She wants your house, your money, your name in her little notebook. No, I said quietly. She wants nothing. That's why she deserves something. Christine paced, her heels clicking sharply against the wood floor. This is ridiculous. You're turning your back on your own daughter, on your grandchildren. I raised an eyebrow. Hazel and Evan haven't called me in 2 years. I didn't even know Evan switched majors. And I only found out about Hazel's engagement because Lorraine read it in the paper. She stopped walking. Her face went still. You're punishing me, she said. This is punishment. You're angry I wasn't a better daughter, so now you're rewriting the story to make yourself the victim. I looked at her then, not as my daughter, but as the woman she had become. Cold, defensive, strategic, and something inside me broke. I don't want revenge, Christine. I want dignity. I want to know that when I leave this world, my life won't be catalogued, condensed, and converted into legal documents that you can stack in your briefcase and forget. I want someone to remember who I was, what mattered to me. Not what I owned. Her jaw tightened. Fine, she said, grabbing her coat. If you want to write me out of your life, go ahead. But don't expect me to stand by when you start slipping, when you can't drive, when you fall, when you forget how to use the microwave. Don't expect me to clean up after your decisions. She walked toward the door, then turned back. And when Lorraine gets bored, when she realizes the inheritance isn't worth the trouble, don't come running to me. I didn't answer. I simply closed the door behind her and stood in the silence she left behind. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, a slow, aching grief. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the lights flicker across the backyard fence, remembering all the nights Eleanor and I had talked about the future. We had planned to grow old together in this house, to leave it to Christine as a symbol of a family continuity. But the woman who came into my house today was not the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest while I read her stories. She was someone else now, hardened, distant, and whatever love remained between us was buried under years of assumptions, resentments, and unspoken disappointment. And so I made a new decision, one not just written in ink, but in resolve. I would leave this house, this life, this narrative. I would leave it on my terms, not out of spite, but out of peace. I would reclaim what little time remained, not to rewrite the past, but to protect the truth from being overwritten. Because if I didn't act now, they would finish what they had started. They would reshape my memory while I was still breathing, and I would not allow that. It began with the letter. A plain white envelope slipped through my mail slot on a Thursday morning. No return address. Just my name, printed in blocky, impersonal letters. I opened it with the same casualness I opened all mail lately. Junk offers, utility notices, the occasional postcard from an old student. But this one was different. It was from a law office in downtown Kansas City. a name I didn't recognize. The tone was formal, the language dense, but the message was unmistakable. Christine had initiated an inquiry into my mental fitness. Not a court filing, not yet, but a documented concern, citing recent cognitive irregularities, evidence of financial vulnerability, and a request for preliminary evaluations by an independent geriatric specialist. There was a list of supporting observations, some allegedly made by neighbors and acquaintances. Anonymous, of course. All unverifiable, all fabricated. I stared at the paper for a long time, feeling heat crawl up my neck. I read it again, then a third time, as if the meaning might change with repetition, but the words were resolute. Christine wasn't just trying to pressure me anymore. She was preparing the ground to take everything. Quietly, legally, bloodlessly. She knew how to use the system better than anyone. And now she was using it against her own father. I called my lawyer immediately. He was as shocked as I was, but not entirely surprised. "It's becoming more common," he said. "Children seeking guardianship of elderly parents, ostensibly to protect them, but often to control assets. The language is vague enough to give her leeway, but you've got time to respond before it escalates. The key will be proving you're of sound mind." He scheduled an evaluation with a local neurologist and gerontologist, both independent and court-approved. I agreed to everything without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. What frightened me wasn't what they'd find. It was that Christine had already convinced herself of the outcome. In her mind, this wasn't a question of truth. It was strategy. Over the next few days, I felt as if I were living under surveillance. I stopped answering the landline. Every knock at the door made my chest tighten. I found myself second-guessing my every word and action. Was I repeating myself? Was I walking slower than usual? Was my handwriting shaky? The mind becomes its own interrogator when put under suspicion. I began to understand how easy it is to doubt yourself when someone else insists you're falling apart. Lorraine noticed it first. She brought over a pie one evening, pecan, Eleanor's favorite, and sat with me on the porch. "You've been quiet," she said. "Even for you." I told her everything. For the first time, I laid it all out. The will, Christine's reaction, the forged forms, the surprise dinner invitation, and now the letter. She listened without interrupting, then placed her hand gently over mine. "She's not afraid you're losing your mind, Gerald," she said softly. "She's afraid you're still using it." That night I began a journal. Not the sentimental one from before, but a daily log. Times, dates, conversations, receipts. I began recording my phone calls, copying every letter I sent or received. I kept duplicates of every document in a locked drawer. I documented meals, medications, errands. Not because I feared actual decline, but because I knew that without evidence, truth can be twisted into delusion. I wouldn't give them that opening. The evaluations went well. The doctors were thorough, polite, clinical. They asked me to perform memory tasks, to interpret proverbs, to discuss current events. One asked me to draw a clock, another to subtract sevens from 100. I complied with mild irritation. Each test a little wound to my dignity, but I passed them all. Their final reports described me as lucid, intact, capable of managing affairs. Still, my lawyer warned me. They'll come back with something else. She won't stop here. And he was right. 2 weeks later, I received notice from the county registry that my property had been flagged for review of ownership. A new title search had been requested, again initiated by Christine's legal team, citing potential inconsistencies in cohabitation status and asset division. I didn't even know what that meant. My lawyer did. "They're trying to invalidate your home ownership," he said. arguing that someone else, Christine or her firm, has de facto custodianship due to your alleged incapacity. He shook his head, exasperated. It's legal gaslighting. They're trying to trap you into making a mistake. I sat in his office, gripping the arms of the chair. What do we do? I asked. He looked at me carefully. We go louder. You file a countersuit. We formally assert your ownership, attach the evaluation results, and make this public. If she wants to push, you push back. It felt strange, preparing to sue my own daughter. But at this point, I knew it wasn't a family matter anymore. It was a question of principle. She had crossed a line, not just morally, but legally, ethically, emotionally. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to replace me, with a version of me that couldn't object, couldn't say no, couldn't resist. A version of me that could be erased and rewritten like a clause in a contract. And I wouldn't let her. The legal filings took time. I gave deposition after deposition. I signed affidavits. I submitted letters of character from former colleagues, from Lorraine, even from a retired principal I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Christine's lawyer backed off the guardianship inquiry, citing resolution outside of court. But I knew that wasn't surrender. It was regrouping. I could feel it in her silence. Weeks went by without a word. No calls, no letters, no unannounced visits. It was the quiet before a new storm. And it arrived on a Tuesday morning. She showed up again, this time with Thornton. No more coffee cups or fake smiles, just a manila envelope in her hand and a tight expression on her face. "Can we talk inside?" she asked. "No," I said. "Whatever you brought, you can say it here." She hesitated, then handed me the envelope. Inside were papers, pages of them, itemized lists, financial records, a printed spreadsheet of every gift I had given them over the past 10 years. Each check, each transfer, even the value of a used car I once co-signed. "We're filing a claim," she said, "to recoup these as advances on inheritance. Legally, you've redirected your estate away from the expected heir. These contributions must now be treated as loans, not gifts." I stared at her, stunned. "You're suing me for money I gave you freely." "Not suing," Thornton interjected. "Correcting. You've restructured your will. We're just asserting what's fair." I laughed then, hollow and bitter. "Fair? You think this is fairness?" Christine met my gaze, and for the first time I saw something raw in her face, not anger, not strategy, but fear. Not of me, but of the truth. The truth that I had chosen someone else, that her claim, moral, familial, emotional, was no longer secure. That frightened her more than anything. I didn't tear the papers. I didn't shout. I simply turned, walked inside, and closed the door. I sat at my desk for a long time, the envelope unopened beside me, and wrote one line in my journal. They want everything except the responsibility of love. I didn't hear from her for weeks after that. My lawyer responded to their claim with a formal rebuttal, attaching all relevant documentation, the bank statements, the signed letters, the evaluations. The judge dismissed the claim without hearing, but the damage was done, not to me, but to the idea of Christine, to the memory of the child I once carried on my shoulders at the zoo, to the girl who cried when her goldfish died. That version of her no longer lived in any courtroom or folder or file. She had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who had forgotten the softness of shared history and replaced it with the sharpness of entitlement. I spent long hours that month going through old photo albums, removing some pictures, keeping others. I boxed them separately. One for me, one for posterity. and one that I knew I'd eventually destroy. Not out of spite, but out of mourning. Because some memories, like people, become too painful to preserve. One evening, Lorraine found me asleep in the armchair with a stack of old letters in my lap. She covered me with a blanket and made tea. We didn't speak much, but as she poured the tea into the chipped mug Eleanor used to favor, I felt something shift, not rage, not sorrow, but resolve. I would finish this, and then I would disappear from their reach. Not because I was defeated, but because I was finally free. The morning I left, I didn't tell anyone. I had packed 2 days earlier, folding my shirt slowly, lining up my books in careful stacks, wrapping a framed photo of Eleanor in an old scarf that still faintly smelled of her lavender soap. I walked from room to room, touching objects not to take them, but to remember them. The house felt smaller than it used to, not because it had changed, but because I had. It was no longer a place of sanctuary, but a symbol of something I had outgrown. The idea that permanence could protect you from betrayal. I closed the front door softly, turned the key once in the lock, and slid it under the mat. I did not look back. My new apartment was small but efficient, located on the quiet edge of a neighborhood where no one knew my name and that, for once, felt like a blessing. I had paid the first 6 months' rent in advance, using a cashier's check from the funds I'd moved to a new account. One with no joint access, no history, no traceable handhold for Christine to grasp. I furnished the space with essentials. A modest bed, a table for 2, a recliner by the window that overlooked a lake so still it felt painted onto the world. In this silence, I did not feel invisible. I felt protected. I sent one final package to Christine. It was not a letter. It contained a formal notice prepared by my attorney, an irrevocable transfer of remaining co-ownership rights to a trust that excluded her by name. Enclosed were the medical evaluations, the court dismissals, a notarized copy of my updated will, and a personal item I had kept since her childhood, a drawing she had made in 2nd grade of the 3 of us. Me, her, and Eleanor, beneath a bright orange sun with the words, "Family is forever," scrawled in misspelled crayon. I'd kept it in my desk for decades. I did not write a note. I wanted the silence to say what words never could. 3 days later, the call came. I let it ring. My new number had already been shared only with essential services and Lorraine, who had helped me move. I let the machine pick up. Her voice was unrecognizable. Strained, exhausted, unfamiliar even in its pitch. "Dad," she said, then paused. "You've made your point. Congratulations. I hope it was worth it." There was no apology, only accusation camouflaged in weariness. She hung up after 10 seconds. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the wind ruffle the lake's surface. I wondered if she had cried. I wondered if she had read the documents or if she had thrown them away in a fit of pride. I wondered whether she understood that this wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. I wanted to know that when I finally closed my eyes for the last time, my story would not be rewritten by someone who only remembered the parts that served her. A week later, I met with my attorney for the last time. The trust had been finalized. The house, what was left of my claim to it, was officially outside Christine's reach. The new will had been entered into the public record. The healthcare directive was signed. My financials were streamlined, my name detached from every shared asset we had once held. "You're a ghost to her now," my lawyer said, not unkindly. "That's the idea," I replied. That night, Lorraine came over with soup. We ate quietly, and afterwards she reached across the table, took my hand, and said nothing. It was the first human touch I had received in weeks, and it nearly undid me. Not because it was romantic. It wasn't. but because it was real. It wasn't transactional. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't burdened with expectation. It was just warmth, and I hadn't realized how much I missed it. The next morning, I received a notice from the title office. Christine had filed an appeal against the trust. Her argument, though professionally worded, was desperate. A last gasp of control built on insinuations about my mental state that had already been legally dismantled. My lawyer smiled grimly. "This won't hold," he said, "but we'll have to respond." I nodded. "Let's respond formally, and then let it end." 2 weeks later, the court dismissed her appeal in its entirety. The judge's language was restrained but clear. The petitioner has demonstrated no evidence of coercion, incompetence, or legal irregularity. The documents stand. It was over. There would be no further attempts. No more letters. No more envelopes on my doorstep. Christine had spent her last arrow, and I had not flinched. That night I sat by the lake in my coat, watching the stars ripple on the water. I thought about how things end, not in explosions or declarations, but in the stillness after the noise has spent itself, in the quiet when even memory begins to loosen its grip. I was no longer a father in the way Christine wanted me to be. I was no longer a resource, no longer a liability, no longer a gatekeeper to something she believed belonged to her by birthright. I was just a man, free for the first time in years, and I was not afraid anymore. It's been 7 months since I left the house, and 5 since Christine last tried to contact me. I imagine she tells herself that I pushed her away, that I chose bitterness over forgiveness, distance over healing. Perhaps that's how she makes sense of it. Everyone needs a version of the story that lets them sleep at night. But I sleep better now than I have in years. My days have taken on a quiet rhythm. Coffee at dawn, a walk by the lake before the heat settles, reading in the afternoon, sometimes a visit from Lorraine. She brings crossword puzzles and recipes she never follows. We sit together in silence more often than we talk, but silence shared with someone kind is never lonely. The trust is managed by an independent fiduciary now. The house was sold, and the proceeds divided as instructed. Christine received a sum. Not everything, not nothing, enough to close the chapter if she ever chooses to. The rest went to causes Eleanor believed in: literacy programs, hospice care, a fund for teacher supplies in low-income districts. And Lorraine. I named her as the steward of a modest fund tied to a foundation in Eleanor's name. She cried when I told her. "This isn't about money," she said. "It's about being seen." And she was right. I don't expect Christine to forgive me. I'm not sure I need her to. Forgiveness, I've learned, is a private ritual. It happens in the quiet corners of the soul, not across courtroom tables or through lawyers' letters. I forgave her long before the legal war ended. I forgave her not because she asked, but because I needed to let go of the weight she no longer wanted to carry. I remember her as a child, how fiercely she loved, how deeply she feared losing control even then. That fear followed her into adulthood, twisted into ambition and precision and cold logic. I don't blame her, but I couldn't let her rewrite me. A few weeks ago, a package arrived. No return address again. Inside was a small envelope, and within it a photograph, one I had forgotten existed. It was Christine at 12, Eleanor behind her, arms wrapped around her shoulders, both of them laughing. On the back, in Eleanor's handwriting, it said, "Our whole world in one frame." Beneath it, scribbled in fresh ink, was a single sentence. I read everything. No name, no signature. Just that. I sat holding that photo for a long time, and I did something I hadn't done in months. I wept, not out of grief, not even regret, but something quieter, a kind of surrender. A final loosening of the thread that had tied me to an expectation that things could be like they were. They can't. Life doesn't return to what it was. But sometimes, a truth finds its way through all the noise. And sometimes, it comes in silence, wrapped in an envelope, scrawled in ink. I've come to believe that legacy is not about who gets the house, or the money, or the title on a deed. It's about the imprint we leave on others' lives, whether they feel seen, heard, remembered. I won't be a statue or a scholarship or a wing of a building, but maybe someone will read my name on a check for school books and wonder who Gerald Mason was. Maybe Lorraine will tell someone that I made her laugh when she thought she'd forgotten how. Maybe Christine will one day find her way to peace and remember me not as a man she fought, but as a man who loved her enough not to let her destroy the best parts of him. The lake is still tonight. The stars are out. And I, finally, am at rest.